My name is Connie Chan. I'm District 1 Supervisor, currently representing the Richmond, also currently the Budget Committee Chair. We just ended our board meeting today, so I'm really glad to be able to join you this evening. I know you have 3 questions for me, and I think I remember some of them, and so I'm happy to approach those 3 questions as however way you deem appropriate. You can ask me however way or any kind of order that you like, and or any other questions that you like related to budget.
Great. Well, hopefully you're going to make a presentation for us. Is that are you ready to start, or is
I am ready to start. I don't quite have the exact budget presentation for which I normally do, because I think many of you actually probably know the budget really well, but I'm going to quickly go through that really quick. Is that the city has this year, the mayor has proposed a $15.88 billion budget, out of which majority really is what we call enterprise agency, which is SFPUC, SFO, and remaining of this roughly $6.83 billion is what we call a general fund department, and say our police department, sheriffs, fire, as well as Department of Public Health. In fact, Department of Public Health, it's probably the top general funded city department, roughly at $3 billion. I do have Francis Shea, who's staffing me on my on budget on our team. That does have a presentation we can share with you. But just overall, the fact that what the board of supervisors does is that when the mayor proposed her budget, we evaluate it. We figure out ways to maybe potentially shift the spending. We have city departments to come through, and in fact, we just finished the first round of city department hearing last week, and we just hear their presentation about their spending. Majority of time for me, at least, is to evaluate their what we call a full-time employees, the number of them, if there are any vacancy, and their function. We also hear their contract. But let me also be clear, the only time that the board supervisor to evaluate any type of city contract is only when that city contract generate more than $1 million of revenue, or that in expenditure that we're spending more than $10 million, or the duration of the contract is more than a decade. That's the only time when this board supervisor will be evaluating any city contract. As you know, we've been having a lot of, unfortunately and regrettably, wasteful spending, in fact, corrupt spending with these city contract. It's a very a problem for us. And I see that there's like 3 questions that you have proposed for me that I like to answer them, because I know they're mainly really about contract. So I'm going to go into that if that's okay.
please?
Yeah. And so the first questions that I see here is that really about regulatory review. Technically, we do that already, and that is really what the controller does. And controllers actually evaluate this. In fact, we just have a first round of nonprofit shows that they are in delinquent status with the state attorney general. And so then those contracts are paused. Now, we probably say, well, shouldn't it has been, but then why do we have all these like corrupt contracts and wasteful spending? Well, there's a couple of things. And one is that we only get those delinquent status at the end of the year. They're not at the beginning of the contract time terms. Sometimes it's in the middle of the contract already, then that we find out. So then typically then what we end up doing, and in this case, is pausing the contract. Sometimes when we go out to bid, request for proposal, there's no such like we don't know their status or whether it's up to date at that time. We wouldn't really have that information in an immediate term. But if we do, then typically it would probably disqualify them. And so those are the regulatory review that is put in place. Can we do better? Absolutely. But let me also just tell you this, the problem, part of it, I also think, is that even with the review, there got to be people who actually read the review and the reports. Let me just say that. And that people actually have to act on it. And that is partly when I want to say that the problem with the administration, and really board supervisor too, got to take the responsibility. And like I said, though, it all depends on the dollar value. And those are the moments where city leaders, city department heads, the elected leaders should have acted when those reports are read and uncovered. So that's really what we need to do better. I think the second question about single source, which I think we typically say sole source contract. Sole source contract mean it actually means that, like, I want to give a quick because I know that folks are talking about the bicycle coalition here, and I just want to give a quick explanation about what happened with the San Francisco Bicycle Coalition contract with SFMTA. From what I learned is that it did go through a contract procurement process. It's just that Bicycle Coalition was the only bidder to that contract, and therefore by default they won the contract. Now, that is not a sole source contract. It means that it still went out for bid. It's unfortunately by default there's only one bidder, and so then that's how you get the results. Sole source contract is a problem and can be a problem. It means that, like, it doesn't even go out to bid at all. The city department just picked a contractor and went with it. It does happen from time to time. Let me explain. For example, if you are having a emergency, like Stern Grove, if there's an emergency repair because there's a storm, it needs to happen right away. It's an emergency repair. That in those events, that the city department heads actually has the authority to go for a sole source contract. However, to actually do an immediate and emergency repair. However, within the 30 days, they will have to declare an emergency by resolution, and that will have to come to the board for approval. That we approve that it is an emergency nature, you can go ahead and continue with that work and continue with that sole source contract. SFMTA, if they were to go for a sole source contract, like I said earlier, if it's under $10 million and less than 10 years, it will not come to the board for approval. And most importantly, SFMTA is actually an independent body. They will, the SFMTA board of directors will evaluate those contracts on their own without needing to come to the board. The third one, the length of term, length for service contract, it's a 2 years budget. Absolutely agree that, contract terms should really stick to the budget, 2-year budget cycle. Frankly, if we can't afford it, we shouldn't contract it, we shouldn't fund it. It's actually a much better way and smarter way to budget our contract, is what we've been trying to do since I've been budget chair for the last 2 fiscal years, is to ring in all these contracts and say, let's not do more than 5 years. Let's not do more than however many years that it's beyond the budget cycle. And let's make sure we really are funded. These contracts are actually funded, but most importantly, that these contract actually works before we even go too far beyond into the contract terms. We've been doing that for the last 2 years, but they're going to be contract like lease agreement, meaning you're leasing an office. Those are not as easy to do a 2-year contract term because typically a lease for an office, they would say we want more than 5 years or 10 years with the option to extend. So typically that is really the case for all these contracts, but you will actually see a lot of nonprofits, smaller ones, less than 5 million usually. They are really, it's what they go through a year by year request for proposal process, and then they will come back again and again for each budget year for their request. So it's a tales of the two city. They're large contractors that just get really big contract, or that they just have ongoing, and then there are ones that are just really small and not necessarily has stabilized city funding. So it all depends on how the administration administer those contracts too. So I'm ready to answer any questions you may have.
I have my hand raised. I have a question regarding business taxes. I understand San Francisco has a 36% vacancy rate of businesses in San Francisco. Should there not be enough taxes from the business community? Is it possible that our homeowner taxes are going to be going up? Thank
So
you.
yeah, so parcel tax versus business tax, and business tax will inclusive of gross receipts, sales tax. Those what we consider business tax, and parcel tax is what homeowners pay for the parcel tax. We can always increase all those taxes by voters' approval. The board and the mayor cannot just increase taxes on our own without coming to you, the voters, for approval. And that's including definitely parcel tax. So we have, and in fact, and you've been generous as voters. We came to you for just as recent as sales tax renewal. So that's for the business tax. We have come to you for bonds. However, the city bonds, which is partly how you collect for how we collect for parcel tax. However, the city bond, though, since 2016, we have adopted a policy. It's really learning from the failures before that we say, unless we retire the debt that we have borrowed, we will not be just keep on piling the debt. So we have been keeping the parcel tax specifically for the city bonds level. It has been remaining the same. And so again, when you say about like the business, when we say, hey, business tax reform, which what you probably see this November, it's still undergoing for signature gathering, tax reform specifically for gross receipts, which is a business tax. It's going to come to you for approval if that get on the ballot, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it will increase your parcel tax. I hope that answered your question.
Thank you, Connie. Appreciate it.
And Lee Robbins is the next person with a question.
Yes. So I'm impressed. It sounds like a fairly good process for allocating the budget and making the decisions, but there's another piece of it that may not be your arena that I'm concerned about. So the budget process and what you're describing, the contracts, is what they say they're going to do. What kind of evaluation is there of what they have done and of the specific people who are making claims? What if they've been liars in the past? How does that enter into the decision process, if it does?
Like who selects contract? And so this is a few things that you're absolutely right, Lee, because that is exactly some of the issues that we've been tackling. There's a few things that the board has done. Well, first of all, the board does not select contract. We would never, the board supervisor and their aides will never be a panelist selecting the contract. It will be a violation. In fact, a violation of Charter 2.114. We cannot interfere a daily operation of city government. However, so who are these panelists? Now that is really the tricky part. Who are the panelists that would typically select any type of contract? And we really have done, especially the last few years, we have done two things specifically. One is that we expand the requirement of who needs to file Form 700, meaning like if you are selecting contract, city contract, if you are a panelist judging, grading city contract selection, you will have to file a 700 form, which means to disclose any type of income, if you have a spouse, which is not just be a domestic registered partner or a married spouse, you will have to disclose your income as a household. And so we know where your money is coming from or how you're being paid or how any type of gift that you're receiving as a city employee. And second piece is what we call behest waiver or behest payment requirement. We basically technically banned city employee in conversation with any type of interested party that could be a contractor potentially 6 months before the RFP process, and then 6 months after the RFP process, we're saying you're not allowed to interact and receive any type of payment or solicit any type of payment, even for third party, like a nonprofit. So we have done those to regulate as much as we can, but
And who enforces violations if they're discovered?
you mean like, oh, so that will be the controller, and clearly also whistleblower is a good program that we encourage, because it's actually a combination, is both the city attorney, controller, and district attorney and HR, that they come together to determine, is this a criminal matter or is it like an HR and different types of investigation that should go on. And definitely the city attorney has a public integrity unit that will also do the investigation.
Thank you.
And George Wooding, you're next.
Thank you. Nice to see you here, Connie. I have a quick question. San Francisco is the second largest employer in San Francisco. The mayor has already signed contracts, which nail down benefits. Benefits are going to be increasing over time. And that's right now, 60% of the general fund is used for employees. And it's pushing pressure on the discretionary fund, which I believe is around 50 million a year. Correct me if I'm wrong. So what I'm thinking is the average general growth fund rate used to be about 4% a year in the city. And now what I see is it was 9% last year, and it's going to remain around 2.8%, which is giving us a huge deficit of over $1 billion easily, and much more. And I happen to disagree with how the city is looking at the budget, in that I think that the lower growth rate will continue. And what I wanted to ask you is your thoughts on the growth rate, because my last statement here is we're a tech town that's having workers leaving, and every time we cut a city employee now, we're also hurting the potential budget of San Francisco, as strange as that sounds. So that's my question.
So if anybody has been tracking shares, or I should say the city's 5-year financial report, and then which then eventually like also a quarterly report of our projection, the tax revenue has remained flat in the last 2 fiscal years every quarter. And there may be some volatility, volatile. It may be volatile for taxes like the CEO overpay tax or overpay CEO tax, or the transfer tax. Like maybe there's like kind of a little bit like volatile for those two, but for the most part, in terms of tax revenue, has remained quite stable. I can give you a good idea about it. Interestingly, for example, SFO actually travel and their tax revenue quite been consistent. And in fact, they're coming back 90% of at the rate of 2019. So that's pretty good if you think about it, meaning like technically SFO would really be coming back, but hotel tax has remained very, very flat. So you kind of have to question, where do all these people go? Because they clearly are coming to SFO, but they're not coming to and stay in San Francisco. And so that remains to be the challenge of San Francisco's tax revenue and continue as we see our future. And I think what it means then San Francisco city government, and you're right, George, we are second. We have, to the largest like employer, we have about well over 35,000 city employees at this moment. And so what do? And we do need all of them to do the work that we're doing. I wouldn't say the tech worker left town. What I would say is that they have not going to downtown. They've been working from home. I think there's a few things that the city must do. One is learning from the lessons of tech companies. We need to diversify our workforce so that we're not like reliant to one industry. And I think that we need to actively to do so, be it downtown or anywhere else. You see the most vibrant neighborhood corridors are usually a corridor like Clement that actually have very diverse type of small business, not just one type, but many different types, so that they can create its own ecosystem. I do think that the city government itself also needs to rein in its spending overall. While we have all these city workers, 60% of salaries and benefits and all that's in spending, that actually still leave us good 40% of what I would call, because all depends on how you look at discretionary. And I say that 40% actually is discretionary. We need to be a lot more creative with the way we evaluate contract and accountability and delivering results. We also need to be a lot more thoughtful about our spending. So I think those are things that we need to do right now, not tomorrow, not next year, but right now to actually change the course. I really am firmly believe, and I'm not trying to be gloom and doom, I do believe that we're facing a fiscal cliff in January 2025. And it's the reason why even my colleague was like, why? It doesn't get you a lot of money, like $1.5 million. $1.5 million is a lot of money in the time when you have $780 million of budget deficits. Every $1 million count. And I just proposed today, I think they're very mad at me today.
No, thank you for doing it.
10% of salary reserve. So my friends are like, my colleagues are like, that's 10% of our salary. But hey, guess what? You know, if we're asking city workers and to do more with less, we're cutting contracts and services and programming for seniors and youth. We need to lead the way. And
you know why department heads are so mad? Because the mayor wanted to give them a 9% a year salary increase.
Oh, no.
And you cut their salary by.
it's not an arbitrary number.
Okay,
So
next
I thought
question.
that was great.
Okay, the call-in guest ending in 936.
Hi, Supervisor Chan. Hi, this is Eileen Boken with Speak. I sent in a pre-submitted question about the SFPUC budget. And since there has been longstanding allegations of corruption, that the budget of the PUC be approved contingent on their agreement to both a financial and a performance audits by the BLA, not their own staff, and that they pay for it because they don't want to pay for it, even though they're an enterprise department, and that it be started in the upcoming fiscal year. And I wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to be clear that first of all, it's an enterprise agency. So we actually come up with their budget in May, not now anymore. Now it's just the general funded departments. However, I want everyone to also know that to think that the SFPUC investigation is done and over, I think we're mistaken. That actually the city attorney with the public integrity units there's still ongoing investigation. I want to parse between, you know, a criminal corruption versus wasteful spending. There's still a difference between the two, meaning like there's spending that is like there's not a corrupt spending, but it's not delivering results. Clearly, in the case of SFPUC, in what we have learned is actually corruption. It's criminal matter. It is not just like, oh, you know, like Department of Homelessness and Supportive Housing is your navigation sites, or is your tiny homes, is your, you know, some of these like permanent supportive housing, are they actually delivering results that we asking for? And are you actually placing people in a long-term home? That's not what we're talking about. In the SFPUC, it's really corruption that actually happened, and it's still an ongoing investigation with public integrity units. So those are the two different things that is happening in the audit. And they do, because again, they are actually an enterprise agency. They not only being audited by our city, they actually also are have oversights by the state and about the ratepayer and how they do ratepayer spending. And that really is what, although not the most ideal oversight body, which is, well, personally, I do not think it's a great oversight body, is this California CPUC. So they really is where that is at.
Gosh, that was a good question, good answer. Thank you so much.
And next is Steve Ward. You got to unmute yourself.
Good. Yes. Okay. Good evening, Supervisor Chan. My question is sort of a proposal rather than a question, but I just want to get your thoughts on this. And I know we've been talking a lot about, there's actually always two components always in any kind of organization, whether that be profit or nonprofit, and that has to do with what are your expenses and what is your income. And one of the things, for example, in your district, there's a tremendous asset the city of San Francisco has, which is Washington High School. It has a field in the back and it has a great field in the front that has seating that looks over the Golden Gate Bridge. Plus, it's inside Washington High School, has a nice auditorium and all these classes and so on and so forth. So this is a great example of what I want to talk about and what I want to propose. And what I'm proposing is that the city of San Francisco partners with the San Francisco Unified School District to use those assets during the time that they're not being used, while they're sitting there fallow. For example, to make them available for various organizations to use. Corporations for conventions, for example, can use auditoriums and classrooms and that kind of thing. Then there are other organizations like the Outside Lands people that could have, big events at the Coliseum there that's on the front end of Washington High School. But this is just one example of where you can use the assets that are standing there not doing anything but causing you expenses to garner income to the city and to the Unified School District. What I'm proposing is a partnership between the two organizations to generate income on the income side to the city. And what I'm asking you is, what would be your perspective on this proposal? And would you be willing to propose such a partnership? Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're already kind of doing that in the level which really benefiting the parent-teacher associations at Lafayette Elementary and Argonne Elementary, where they open up the school yard to allow parking, and so they can fundraise during the Outside Lands concert series for the weekend. Let me be very clear about specifically on these SF Unified School District, and not only the schools that they have, but they also actually have surplus land. And what they have done is they also built affordable housing on those sites, like Francisco Scott Keys, and you can see that. And I think that the challenge with the challenge with SFUSD is that not only that it's a state entity, and that state entity has really interesting policy when it comes to their surplus land and their property. And I think that there gotta be I would say, capital planning and development thinking around that, and they need to make some investment. Regrettably, I think that the Unified School District is really facing a large and looming deficits of $240 million. I think that they're kind of short of that capacity at the moment, but I really hope, I agree with you, Steve, is that not just them, but what can we do as a city too? Like, what do we do with the land that we have? especially have their surplus. So every March, the city administrator is supposed to render a report to the board supervisor and the really city leader about surplus land and what can we do with those sites. And so we had that, but so far, city has not really have any surplus land that is be able to make use outside of city facility just yet. But I agree that approach. And the city,
What,
yeah.
all I was suggesting was a partnership between both San Francisco Unified and the city, because the city has the expertise and the connections with the convention bureaus and so on and so forth. And SFUSD has the property. So a partnership between the two of you could utilize those resources to make funds for both of the deficits that you're both suffering under a plan. And like, for example, this summer, Washington High School will stand there fallow, not making any money. But if you guys got together and said, hey, let's form a partnership here and see how we could utilize that huge facility over there. And then it's not only that one, it's Lincoln High School. It's a bunch of other facilities that could be offered to convention bureaus and what have you to start to generate the income to pare down the deficits that you guys are both suffering under. So that is what I hope somebody such as yourself will propose, you know what I mean, at the Board of Supervisors. That's what I was
Okay,
talking about.
one question, and thank you for that. It was a very good question.
Judy
Okay.
Gorski is next.
Oh, hi. Well, my question goes way back to when you were explaining about the sole source contracts. Seems very small compared to this big overview, so I apologize for that. But what I don't understand is if a contract is bid out to 200 entities and only the one bicycle coalition over and over year after year accepts, is the only one who sends a bid while this offer is out there to all these other people. It makes me wonder, and it doesn't sound like the Board of Supervisors would be able to maybe even know this, but what is inserted into those contracts that make them so unappealing to the other, 199 people that are getting these contracts and say, I don't think we should bid on it. So what kind of little deal is going on that it's acceptable to the bicycle coalition and not to, all those other people?
Yeah, I I'm going to speak on a more of a general term instead of a very specific contract. And I'm going to, typically for requests for proposal, we'll have certain level of requirement. And I'm not saying that this is the case here because I don't know. I have no facts on both the request for proposal language as well as the response to it. But generally speaking, I think that you could really tailor the request for proposal. For example, you can also tailor it in a way that if only they have done this work in previous year. And so then you are going to drastically limit who qualify in that pool. I don't know if the city attorney will allow that kind of language. So by the way, so it's not like they can just draft up anything and then just send to the world. Clearly, the city attorney and each city department has city attorney will have to review and approve and say this is legal and sound, and before a ARP request for proposal go out, and that clearly then they receive the response, and then before they go propose to show the contract for approval, it also has to be approved by the city attorney and say this is good to go. So it's not like there's no other ways to screen those things, but it's also the reason why you do tend to, or the way however long, you tend to have these legacy contracts all around the city. When someone knows the city, knows it well, and has done this work for more than a year or two, or maybe a decade in this case, I think it's kind of like Bicycle Coalition. then you tend to know the RFP. You can probably copy and paste it. I don't know. That I'm not saying this is the case. I'm saying maybe, like maybe that could be the case. But I really do hope. I think this goes back to each city department, and it's the reason why I talked about the administration itself. It's critical. Is that I think at some point we have to really ask ourselves, like, what are we spending these money for? And are they delivering the results? Are we safer? Are we better off? Are we many, many things that when we say that we will accomplish with these type of contract? And if they are not, most importantly, if in the events that we don't think that they are actually delivering us the results, is there any political will and ability from the administration and elected leader to say it's time to stop? Thank you.
Okay, Frank, you're next.
Hi, Supervisor. Retirement benefits, pensions, and health plans are obviously an important part of the city budget. They're a big part of the budget, and they're also crucial to those 35,000 employees and more important, the hundreds of thousands of former employees, retirees. So my question is there any thought to converting from a defined benefit plan to a defined contribution plan that is more stable? It's something that the city would find easier to meet and would give us a better chance of staying out of bankruptcy in the future. There are some cities and government entities in the state that now pay their retirees more than their employees because of previous defined benefit plans.
So in 2012, there's a ballot measure that voters again approved that really reform a lot and really, in terms of thinking about the future of the retirement and the benefit system itself, and like how we understood that then, like that could be taxing, and how do we continue to keep the system healthy, not just for those that retire, and that we need to honor what we have done and what they have done for the city and what we have done for them in terms of the contract and that in agreement too, but also for the generations of city workers to come. And so after that 2012 ballot measure pension reform is that we see a much healthier and robust system today. In fact, I want to say that we just have our house service board. We understand the cost of house service and healthcare has really significantly increased, and specifically for the Medicare portion for our retiree. So our house service board staff prepare an RFP request for proposal process and went out for bid. And the result is that we found a service provider, or I should say a service provider that is really administering those services with the same type of network, same level of care, and same coverage for $67 million less over the course of next 3 fiscal years. And that is not just for the city of San Francisco, but also for Unified School District and City College of San Francisco. And the Health Service Board today, and thanks to my colleague too, like who's sitting on that board on our behalf of the board supervisor, is Supervisor Matt Dorsey, really cast that vote to make sure that we keep that new contract, and so that we can have that $67 million of cost saving over the next 3 fiscal year with the same level of coverage and benefit. So I think that there is that the Health Service Board as an oversight body is actively overseeing that and take their fiduciary responsibility seriously. And I think that's just for the Health Service Board, and the Retirement Board, on the other hand, also continue to really making sure that the system holds together. So you really do have two bodies, regulatory bodies overseeing that and making sure things are working. And so far to date, I think that we've been responsible enough to make sure that we're not overtaxing the system.
So I'm afraid perhaps you misunderstood me. My question was, would you consider a defined contribution plan for pensions versus the current defined benefit plan that we have?
I'm supportive of the current plan that we have. I think it's really negotiated again. We have a pension reform in 2012 and went to the voter. It's sustained it this way. I'm not about to like single-handedly to go out and to change the existing system. I think it's working well. It's not broken. Let's keep up with that. But I want to also plead ignorance in this case, like, you know, the difference between contribution and, you know, I'm not too sure if I really understand that question, but I can say with what I understand, the way that it was working right now, it is working.
Okay, Mary Eliza's next.
Hi, Connie, I did have a question about what kind of relationship we have with Hetch Hetchy. The San Francisco supposedly is supposed to be getting water, and I thought power from Hetch Hetchy. So is there some kind of report or some kind of information about what percentage of the city's water or what percentage of the power? And is it expandable at all? Are we reliant on somebody else's wiring and piping system to take advantage of these assets?
So I want to say, so I think the two things that we're talking about here is about Hetch Hetchy, specifically both as a water source for the city and county of San Francisco, as well as a power source for the city and county of San Francisco, because hydraulic power is also what we're taking on as clean power SF. So we're dependent as a city and county of San Francisco, dependent on Hetch Hetchy, amazing, you know, like improvement in the last 2 or 3 decades where we're at today. So I'm going to speak on specifically on power source at the moment that through Clean Power SF, because the question I think for Mari is about like, are we depending on someone else's pipe? So technically as a power source, absolutely, we are dependent on PG&E's power grid. It is, they own the grid. We don't own the grid. We may say that, you know, if you're a public building, you're using Hetch Hetchy power or Clean Power SF. In fact, and so that's what we say you can actually depend on the renewable power source if you sign on with Clean Power SF. However, the grid is really belong to PG&E. And can we expand those renewable power source? Absolutely. That's what Clean Power SF as a program is about. It continue to figure out way to do renewable energy. What can we do in terms of battery storage and many other things as a power source? As a water source, yes, we own our own pipe and water pipe, and it's really our water source. However, our water pipe, some are 100 years old, if not older. We are definitely in a space where I have just urged as a PUC to, even though budget and legislative analyst has recommended an investment of maintenance for $15 million per mile. As a PUC, we really urged that with all the water main breaks that we have experienced, that with flooding and all that, and that city actually has to pay out in claims and settlements, we have urged them to really reconsider, because they originally only proposed at $5 million per mile, which is $10 million short. They have upped the maintenance budget to $12 million per mile. It's a huge improvement. It is not an easy expense. So it's really something for us to think about, but I think that is a worthwhile long-term investment. When I was aide to Supervisor Sophie Maxwell, when we talk about water pipe upgrade, and this was 2006, and I was 25 years old. And they came in as a PUC, and we're like, we need to upgrade our water pipe. And then they're like, oh yeah, it's about $1 billion. And my eyes, can you imagine in 2006, $1 billion was a lot of money. Like, it was like our city budget was less than 5 billion then. So, and so today is much, much larger. And I am too scared to talk about that number, but it has to be done.
I wanted to say there's a little bit of chatter in the background. Whoever has their, you know, should mute themselves so that that noise goes away, please. Can you hear it? Anyway, thank you.
And Lee Robbins has another question.
Yeah, so this goes back to the pension issue that was raised for retirement. And it will help probably if I briefly explain what impels me to answer this. So I have a close friend in New Jersey who was a teacher for his entire career there. And he retired, and the pension had cost of living adjustment. And there was a court case, a big court case that probably went on for years, and the cost of living adjustment got removed, as I understand it, basically because they said, we can't afford to pay this. We go bankrupt to do it. And so I'm concerned about it, and I have mixed feelings about it. Fortunately, my friend who lost the cost of living was, he was fine, but I'm sure not everybody was. And so I wonder, what is the situation for San Francisco for retirements?
I want to say, so retirement is where our retirement is 100% funded. It's a healthy fund.
Does it have cost of living adjustment promised for the indefinite future?
Yes. And I want to say cost of living adjustments, it's really a CPI. And then the controller, for all things, like be it our contracts, be it our wages, be it our many things, and minimum compensation wage, and all of that, everything that we do, including some of us do not like it personally sometimes as a resident. I hate it, like our parking fees or any type of fees, really all have cost of living adjustment increase. And so, yes, like that is almost all things that we will just continue to adjust to it. It's the way that both a retirement, health service, any type of contract that we have would go with adjustment. I think that at the end of the day, if I may say, the costs continue to increase. It's a challenge. But it's really also how we manage those funds as well. And I would say again, accountability is important, oversight is important. Both the retirement board and the health service board overseeing these type of benefits for our retirees are actually pretty good. Like they're very they are experts in their own field, and they're doctors and HR and so and actually, in fact, some of them are actually our own retirees. So I think there's a good mix of oversight.
Thank you.
This is so fun. I wish I can hang out with all of you like all the time, because like no one really give me those time of day to allow us to just kind of nerd out, be able to talk about these things in much greater details. And I wish every voter, and I also really wish every resident is as thoughtful and really and as interested as you are about our budget and our money, because we need all the eyes, frankly, that we can have with our budget, with our city departments and city government, and with accountability. So I'm grateful.
Supervisor Chan, we have one more
question?
question
Okay.
from Thomasita Medal.
Hi, Thomasita.
You're going to need to unmute yourself, Thomasita.
No, she just muted herself there. Now you're unmuted.
Okay. The SFMTA seems to be headed by someone who is obsessed with making life as miserable for drivers in San Francisco as possible at every opportunity. The guy running the Recreation and Park Department seems to be obsessed with poisoning the people of San Francisco with these artificial lawns that are known to create cancer on people who play soccer or who play on them. And yet, when the people of San Francisco resisted and put something on the ballot, quickly the mayor's allies, maybe it was Ed Lee at the time, but that particular establishment poured money into defeating the initiative from the citizens so that we could have healthy playing fields behind the beach chalet, but also other playing fields around the city. So we have two guys in charge of two very important agencies that are actually hell-bent, it seems like, not only making our lives miserable, but killing us as well. So is there, okay, so then what I'd like to know is, I want the Bicycle Coalition to stop getting $6 million a year of taxpayer money to influence every department's policies. And I would like to see Muni restore the bus lines that were cut during the COVID pandemic, to restore bus lines because bus stops, because the director has this idea that he wants to make to shave a couple of minutes off the ride from the outer neighborhoods to downtown, even though nobody's going downtown anymore. And when you eliminate bus stops, you make life impossible. You make life riding transit impossible for the elderly. I'm only 75 and I cannot walk. I can't walk more than a half a block. I'm disabled. I have degenerative disc disease. And so I could not take a bus if I didn't have a car. There's thousands of people in this city who are elderly and cannot walk 4 blocks between bus stops, and then you have the children that, we have the 29 bus line. There's either it's the 27 bus line with 29 schools, or it's the 29 bus line with 27 grammar schools and high schools. But nonetheless, I've heard that the kids, they're late for school because there's not enough buses. And so the buses pass them up, they're packed. And yet the San Francisco Municipal Transportation Authority is spending all kinds of thousands of or millions of dollars putting in bike lanes. In the meantime, the school children from the Mission and the Excelsior who want to get to Lowell can't get on the bus because the buses are full and they haven't added buses. Now in 2019, the students from Lowell High School demanded more buses and they were ignored until I think it was 2022 when the SFMTA finally allocated $1 million to deal with this issue. And what did the director do? He, instead of adding buses, he eliminated bus stops on Sunset Boulevard with the idea that that would make the ride faster. And my understanding is that the disability community and the elder community protested this, but as with everything else that the elders and the disability community protest, they were ignored, and the bus stops were eliminated, and no buses were added, and the children are still watching packed buses pass them by, and they don't have a way to they have to wait who knows how long before a bus comes by that can accommodate them.
Thomasita, I want to thank you for such a wonderful set of questions. I think we need to move on the program, however. Thank you for those.
You're welcome.
Okay, yeah, Connie, would you mind answering?
I just want to say first and foremost, again, Charter 2.114, it forbids, in fact, again, we at the board supervisor cannot interfere the day-to-day operation of our administration. It also means that however we feel about these department heads, we are short at calling for their termination. I do think I think that at the end, I think at the end of the day, there's a couple of things that elected leaders like ourselves, I think be it the mayor or the supervisors, will have to ask ourselves is that, if our city departments are not performing, and in no matter what way, be it is because of the leadership, the executive team, or because of the many other ways, like is it our contractors and however way the process, I think that this is a moment that's like, what tools do we have in our toolbox to hold the city departments and accountable, including sort of like what Tomasita, really those are the challenges that for all of us that who've been living in the city for a long time, that we know that, Muni, I think for some of us probably remember, Willie Brown has said he's going to fix Muni in 100 days when he was elected. Muni is not fixed. And, so I think that there are going to be moments that we just have to say, these are something that we need to constantly work on. And we need to have leaders in all level of the city governments that being, smart, but also transparent and accountable, being held accountable for the decision-making process. What we're seeing right now, I think what Tomasita is really saying is, and for all of us to think about for the Rec and Park Department or SFMTA is, and really overall the departments, and for the last few years, when you have a frustration, the frustration comes from the lack of accountability and the lack of transparency, especially the lack of transparency of how those decisions actually are made and come about. There is election in November, so I urge all of you to think about accountability and transparency in city leadership, and so that will be my last like the only sort of feeling like as if I'm being bipartisan or election spiel and answer to that question, but truly that those are the consequences that we face as a city when we elect our leader, and then as a result our elected leader then either appoint or hire city department heads and commissioners. We're all part of the system, and we're all need to be held accountable.
I want to thank you for such a wonderful presentation, and I'm so glad I got to see you at Aaron Peskin's birthday party. You guys are just, chip off the old block. You guys are both great.
Thank you. We appreciate all of you, and again, if you have any questions, Francis on my team can help answer those questions, whatever it is, and of course, my email address is listed on our website, and I read my own email, and feel free to ask any, and I most definitely enjoy conversation with you and around budget, and I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
We're going to be moving on with our program.